There's a voice that can visit writers at the most inconvenient moments. It shows up right when you sit down to write or the second someone asks you what you're working on. And it sounds authoritative and certain. And what it says is this: you're not a real writer. You haven't earned this. You're going to be found out. And that voice has a name, my friends. It is called imposter syndrome. And if you're hearing it regularly, here's the thing I need you to understand before this episode even begins. Imposter syndrome doesn't visit people who have nothing to offer. It visits people who care deeply and are doing something that matters. And the fact that you feel it is actually evidence of your commitment, not your inadequacy. Today, we're going to pull imposter syndrome apart. We're going to look at actually what it is, why it hits writers so hard, and I'm going to give you a 3-part identity reframe that's going to help you write through it and not just feel better about it, but actually keep writing. So stay with me. If you feel called to write a book, but writer's block, procrastination, and self-doubt keep pulling you from the page, you're not alone, and you're not meant to stay stuck. Hi, I'm Madison Michaels, author and life coach, and I've created this podcast as a creative space grounded in faith and mindset transformations to help you break through your blocks, gain creative clarity, and finally finish the book you're meant to write. So grab your cup of liquid gold and let's write the darn book together. Hello, my friends, and welcome to Write the Darn Book. I'm your host, Madison Michaels, and today we are going deep on one of the most common and most misunderstood blocks that writers face. We're talking about imposter syndrome, what it is, why it's so persistent, and how to write anyway, even when it's turned up loud. Whether you've been writing for 20 years or you're working on your very first book, if you've ever heard that whisper that says, "You're not a real writer," or "Who do you think you are to write a book?" then this episode is for you. Let's start by getting clear on what imposter syndrome actually is, because I think a lot of writers use the term without fully understanding the mechanisms underneath it. And when you understand the mechanism, you can actually do something about it. Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern in which a person doubts their own accomplishments and carries this persistent internal fear of being exposed as a fraud. And this is despite clear external evidence of their competence. It was first formally identified in 1978 by 2 psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And here's the thing that will either surprise you or confirm what you've always suspected. It's most prevalent among high achievers. So the more accomplished, thoughtful, and conscientious you are, the more likely you are going to experience imposter syndrome. This isn't a symptom of being unqualified. It's often a symptom of being exactly the right person for the work you're doing. Writers are particularly vulnerable to imposter syndrome, and this is for a few specific reasons. And I want to name them clearly so that you can recognize which one is running you. The first is that writing is inherently exposing, and we've spoken about this before on the podcast. When you put words on a page, you're putting something of yourself there too, your perspective, your imagination, your emotional intelligence. And then you're expected to show it to other people. That level of vulnerability is real and it's significant. It makes complete sense that your protective brain would throw up a wall of doubt before you get too far down that road. The second reason is that writing has no objective measure. A surgeon can point to outcomes, an accountant can point to numbers. A writer looks at a finished chapter and wonders, is this actually good enough? Is this meaningful? Does it actually hold together and work? There's no external instrument that gives you a clean reading of its worth. So the mind often fills in the gap with its own verdict. And for many writers, that internal verdict defaults to, it's not good enough, which equates to I mustn't be good enough. I mustn't be a real writer. The third reason is one that I find especially interesting, and it comes from the NLP lens that I bring to my coaching work. So many writers have a very strong sense of the story they're trying to tell, and that's regardless of their modality. So visual writers, kinesthetic writers, auditory writers, and auditory digital all feel or see or hear the story inside themselves, and they get a real sense of the emotional weight of the scene. And then they sit down to write, and the words that land on the page don't look or feel like what they actually had within them and in their imagination. And that gap between the vivid internal experience and the imperfect external first draft can activate imposter syndrome immediately. Understanding this is the beginning of dismantling imposter syndrome, because once you know that imposter syndrome is actually a protective pattern, not a truthful assessment, and once you know that it specifically targets people who are trying to do something meaningful, then you can start to change your relationship with that internal voice. I want to tell you something about my own imposter spiral, because I think it's important for you to know that this isn't something that visits writers at the beginning and then goes away once you've achieved enough or written enough books. It can revisit you, and sometimes it revisits really hard. I was a police officer for 18 years before I became a full-time author. And for most of those years, I wrote, as a hobby on the side, on weekends, whenever I could actually get to writing away from my work and family time. So I had notebooks tucked here and there. I had pages on my laptop that sometimes I didn't see in a while. But I had this story in me, a historical romance that I could feel so clearly. And I was genuinely terrified to write it in any kind of serious way, because of the voice inside me that kept saying, "Who do you think you are? Police officers don't write novels, certainly not romantic historical suspense novels. You're not educated for this. You're educated for prosecuting, for legal stuff, for logic." So for me, it was really difficult to actually see myself as a writer, and it was much easier to listen to that voice in my head that said, "You're not a real writer, you're a police officer, so stick in your lane." I'm sure some of you feel that right now, trying to balance writing with your career, with what people might expect, with what they think as well. But you see, when I eventually did write the book, when I did finish it and I submitted it, I got an agent and a publisher, you might expect that imposter syndrome went quiet on me. But actually it didn't. It just changed the script. Suddenly, I wasn't saying you're not qualified to write and that you should just be a police officer. Instead, it was actually saying your success was a fluke. Readers are going to realise that. Your next book won't be as good. You just got lucky the first time. The goalposts moved. And that's what imposter syndrome does. It's very, very good at finding a new argument for the same conclusion, which is always that you're not enough. The moment that I cracked that open for me, and I don't mean cracked it in a sense of it disappearing, I mean cracked it in the same sense of light getting through, was when a fellow author said to me something that I've never forgotten. She said, "Madison, if you were actually an imposter, you wouldn't be scared. Imposters don't lie awake worrying about whether they're good enough. They're too busy being seen, being convincing. The fact that you're terrified is the most reliable evidence I know that you actually care about the work and you can do it." Something shifted in me that day. And it wasn't because the fear went away. It was because I understood it differently. The fear wasn't evidence of my inadequacy. It was evidence of my investment to write and my passion for writing and how important it was to me. And that distinction, as small as it might sound, changed everything about how I sat down to write and how I listened to that inner editor in my head telling me things. So now let's get practical. I want to give you a 3-part identity reframe that I use both in my own writing practice and with the writers I coach. This isn't a mindset trick, it's a genuine perceptual shift that actually changes how your brain processes the experience of writing when imposter syndrome is running. Now, the first part is to reframe the voice itself. So this is about changing the meaning you assign to the imposter voice. Right now, when that voice says you're not a real writer, you probably experience it as a verdict, as a truth, as evidence. And when you experience it as truth, it stops you in your tracks. The reframe is this: the imposter voice isn't a judge. It's a guardian. It's the part of your brain that is responsible for keeping you emotionally safe, and it's assessed writing, specifically the vulnerability, the exposure, the risk of being seen and judged, as dangerous. So it's doing what guardians do. It's trying to protect you. You don't need to fight it, and you don't need to shout it down or try to replace it with affirmations. What you can do instead is acknowledge it. You can literally say to that inner voice, I hear you. I know you're trying to keep me safe. I'm going to write anyway. You see, when you stop treating the imposter as an adversary to actually be defeated, and instead you start treating it as a part of you that needs reassurance, something remarkable happens. It quietens. And it's not because you've silenced it by force, but it's because you've given it what it was asking for: acknowledgement. Now, the second part of the reframe is about evidence. Imposter syndrome is, at its core, a cognitive distortion. So it filters out the evidence that contradicts its story, and it amplifies the evidence that confirms it. It's very selectively attentive. So the antidote is deliberate, intentional evidence collection. So what does that mean? That means I want you to think about this specifically. What has writing already given you? Now, I'm not talking about external achievement like a publishing deal or a prize or a 5-star review. I'm talking about the moment when you've written something and it worked. You've read it back and you've just filled with joy because the words came alive and they were saying exactly what you needed them to say. It's when you read back a paragraph you wrote and you felt something inside of yourself. When you stayed at the page, even when it was hard. Those are the moments of genuine writerly capability. And your imposter brain has filed them as irrelevant, but they're not. They're crucial to bring to the forefront. So your job in the second part of this reframe is to retrieve those moments and put them somewhere visible. Now, this might be a document on your desktop, a note in your phone, a page at the front of your writing journal. Doesn't matter where you keep it. What matters is that you deliberately build a body of evidence that contradicts the imposter's single-minded story, because your brain can't hold two contradictory certainties at once. And when you fill it with evidence of your capability, there's less room for evidence of your unworthiness. So jot down all those moments and remind yourself of them whenever that imposter voice starts to get loud. Now, the third part of the reframe is perhaps most important of them all, and it's one that requires the most sustained practice. Imposter syndrome is fundamentally an approval-seeking pattern. So it says, I need other people to confirm that I'm a real writer before I can write like one. And the problem with that structure is that you can never get enough confirmation. There'll always be another reader who doesn't connect with your work, another voice that questions your legitimacy, another moment where the fear comes back. And if you're waiting for the world to tell you you're allowed to be a writer, you're going to be waiting a really long time. The identity reframe says, I don't write from approval, I write from identity. And the identity is this: I am someone who writes, not I am someone who has been approved for writing, or I am someone who has earned the title of writer. It's simply, I write. That's my identity. The writing itself is the evidence, not the response to it. Now, this is where your dope bird writing personality becomes really useful. And if you've taken the quiz at madisonmichaels.com/quiz, you'll know what I mean. So whether you're a dove who writes from empathy and connection, or an owl who writes from precision and depth, or perhaps a peacock who writes from passion and vision, or the eagle who writes from strategy and momentum, your writing personality is the way the story comes alive through you. And it's genuinely yours. It can't be replicated, and it can't be faked, and it can't be invalidated by any external voice that didn't understand it. The imposter cannot touch something that is yours at that level. So write from that place, from the knowledge that the story you're telling is yours alone to tell. That particular way you see the world and you render it in words belongs to you alone and no one else, regardless of their credentials, whatever their publishing history is, how many books they've written, their confidence levels. No one can tell your story the way you can. And that's not arrogance. That is just the truth. No one has your map of the world that you have. So that is your permission to be able to write your story. All right, before we close today, my friends, I want to give you something specific to do, not to think about, but to actually do, because imposter syndrome lives in the thinking space. It thrives in rumination, in second guessing. And the most effective thing you can do against it is to take concrete action that your imposter doesn't want you to take. So here's your one thing for this episode. I want you to write the sentence that your imposter doesn't want you to write. So this might be the opening line of a scene that you've been avoiding. It might be the first line of a chapter that your inner critic has been circling around for weeks. It might even simply be, I am writing a book. One sentence. That's it. Write whichever one feels most risky, most exposing, most like the thing your imposter would most like you to stop from putting on the page. Write it. Don't evaluate it. Don't follow it up with 10 more sentences if that feels like too much. Just that one sentence. Because that one act of writing in the face of your doubt is not a small thing at all. It's evidence, and it goes into your evidence file. It says to your imposter, you showed up and I wrote anyway. And if you're at a point where the imposter has genuinely ground you to a halt, if it's been weeks or months since you've been able to write freely and you feel like you need more than an episode to break through, that's exactly what one-to-one coaching is for. I work with writers at every stage, both aspiring and published, who are carrying this exact weight. We identify exactly where the pattern is running and we do deeper work to shift it, and we get you writing again. You can find out more and book in a conversation with me at madisonmichaels.com/coaching. That's COACHING. I would love to be part of helping you bring this story that is inside of you out into the world. Because remember, you're the only one that can write it. Now, I want to leave you with this as well today. The imposter syndrome that you're experiencing isn't a sign that you shouldn't be writing. It's a sign that you're writing something that matters deeply to you, and that matters. That's worth showing up for, even on the hard days. Remember, my friends, you are the vessel for the story. Let the words flow through you and onto the page. Until next time, take care and let's write the darn book together. My friend, I hope today's episode gave you exactly what you needed for your writing journey. And if it did, would you take 30 seconds to share it with another writer who's struggling to start or finish their book? And if you're loving the show, I'd be so grateful if you left a quick review. It means the world to me and truly makes my day to know that this podcast is helping you. And as you head back into your week, I hope you feel more supported and connected to your creativity. And remember, You're a vessel for the story. So let the words flow through you and onto the page. All right, I'm off to refill my cup of liquid gold and go and do a little writing of my own. Take care, and I'll meet you back here in the next episode of Write the Darn Book.